So as we move into the third video and the last part of this chapter, we'll talk about late adults. So late adults, we're going to say that they are age 61 and above. The normal life expectancy today for most people in the United States is about 78 years. Obviously, some will be more, some will be less. That's an average. Their vital signs of late adults depend on their overall health status, medical conditions, and the type of medications that they take. Late adults begin to see changes in a variety of body systems. With the cardiovascular system, they begin seeing atherosclerosis, which is blood vessels that get blocked. They have aneurysms. The heart is less able to handle exercise and disease, and the vascular system begins to become stiff. This group's respiratory changes include that their airways actually enlarge. The surface area of the alveoli will decrease, which means that there's less gas exchange that will be taking place. They have a reduced lung elasticity. They have increased use of their intercostal muscles. The ribs begin to calcify at the sternum, which means that the rib cage it'll be more difficult for the rib cage to expand. They have a decrease in respiratory muscle strength, and changes in the mouth and nose leave the airway less protected. Within the respiratory system, they'll tend to have a weakening of the smooth muscle of the airways. And so what this will cause is somewhat of a collapsing or narrowing of some of the airways. This smooth muscle will also be less available to change, as we have seen with earlier age groups. So the ability to dilate and constrict become less. Also, within the respiratory system, the vital capacity significantly decreases, which will change the volume of air that they'll have inside their lungs. However, the residual volume increases, which causes a decreased gas exchange in the alveoli. Other body systems that change are the endocrine system. This age group will begin to have diabetes and weight gain problems. The reproductive systems have changes in reproductive organs that make sexual activity more difficult or less enjoyable. The renal system will change based on the structural and functional changes of the kidneys. They have less filtration during this age group. They have decreased kidney mass and fewer nephrons to be able to filter out of the variety of chemicals and substances that the kidney filters. They also have decreased response to fluid and electrolyte imbalances. And this age group begins to also have a decreased sense of taste. They also have weaker teeth. They have a decreased saliva production. They'll also have slower gastric motility, which means that their food won't digest as efficiently as it once did. They'll have less acid secretion, and they have decreased absorption of nutrients and fecal incontinence. And all of this can add to a variety of GI symptoms and GI complaints. This age group also begins to have central nervous system changes. They can lose up to 20% of their brain mass, up to 50% of their neurons, and up to 20% of the frontal lobe synapses. And this is the part of the brain that deals with personality. They'll also have changes in their sleep patterns. They'll also have increased risk of brain injuries from falls or accidents. A small brain may lead to movement within the skull, and these bridging veins may tear. So there's more likelihood of having injuries such as subdural hematoma, as shown here in this diagram. Their peripheral nervous system also begins to change. They'll have diminished sensation, diminished proprioception, which is that ability to know where your body is at within space. For example, if we close our eyes and move our arms or move our legs, we know where our arms and legs are at. So we begin to lose that type of sense. And we also have deteriorated nerve endings. Within the nervous system, there's also a host of sensory changes. This age group can have vision changes, can have hearing changes, such as loss of high-frequency hearing or deafness. People who have worked around loud noises may have hearing loss in certain frequencies. They'll have loss of taste bud sensation and olfactory perception. And finally, we get to the late adult psychosocial changes. As we progress through this age group, these individuals may live in assisted living facilities. They may have financial concerns related to their health. They begin to face their own mortality. And an idea that's called terminal drop hypothesis comes into play. This is adults that maintain a high level of brain function until about 5 years preceding their death. So something I felt was important that your book does not describe are the generational cohorts. So we're going to go through the various generations beginning from the early 1900s to present day. And what you'll find are, even though every individual is different, but within generations you tend to have some similarities. So we're going to start with what's called the GI generation. These are people born between 1901 and 1924. Currently, they're in the 90-plus age group. These individuals grew up during the Depression. So they grew up with times of financial distress. Many people didn't have jobs. Many people, there weren't government programs like we have today to take care of people. So a lot of these programs began during and after the Great Depression. These individuals fought in World War I and World War II, sometimes called the Greatest Generation. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. They fought in World War II, not World War I. They are many times referred to as the Greatest Generation, and this is for a lot of reasons. Much of their youth was during rapid technological development of the day. This group saw the radio being developed and the telephone. The group born between 1925 and 1942 today range the ages of 72 to 89. This group was called the Silent Generation. And again, this is for a lot of reasons. They were too young to fight during World War II. However, they were too old for what was called during 1967 the Summer of Love and the hippie subculture. So these folks were too young to fight in World War II, but too old to partake in the hippie generation. The next generation are called baby boomers. And this is many times what the group that we are treating today, who are age 50 to 71. The baby boomers were born beginning in 1943, and many resources will tell you they go to 1964. Some may end that a little earlier. However, this age group, their parents often fought in World War II. Over 16 million Americans served in the military during World War II. So these children grew up as children of veterans. They were born during the economic and baby boom after World War II. As hippies, they protested against the Vietnam War. Many of them participated in the Civil Rights Movement. And they did all of this with rock and roll music blaring. They grew up with privileges in a time of widespread government subsidies in post-war housing and education. Also during this time was the GI Bill. And this generation became the wealthiest, most active, and most physically fit of any previous generation. Generation X, or Gen X, was born between 1965 and 1979. Today they're between the ages of 35 and 49. Childbirth rapidly fell during childbirth rapidly fell after the baby boomers. Gen X, as children, they were often referred to as the latchkey generation. This is because shifts in economic times required two family incomes. Societal values changed, increasing divorce rates left many of these children at home with minimal adult supervision. As teenagers, they experienced the AIDS epidemic, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. This group is sometimes called the MTV generation. MTV was founded in 1981. The X in their name refers to the generation's desire not to be defined. They became very independent and have entrepreneurial tendencies. Millennials, or Generation Y, were born between 1980 and the year 2000. These individuals today are aged 14 to 34. They experienced the rise of the internet. They're known to be dependent on technology, and they are also called entitled or narcissistic. And the final generation we'll talk about is Generation Z. These individuals were born between 2001 and 2013. Today they're aged 1 to 13. This is the first generation born with the internet. They're suspected to be the most individualistic and technology-dependent generation. This generation also does not remember the 9/11 attacks.